Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. You know how much we love to explore unconventional wisdom, right?
Oh, yeah.
So today we're going to be looking at excerpts from a book by Hiroyuki Nishimura.
Interesting.
Now, if that name doesn't ring a bell, he's a pretty prominent Japanese internet entrepreneur, and let me tell you, he is known for being blunt.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and not afraid to challenge the status quo.
I like that.
This book is basically his advice for young people navigating their careers and, trying to figure things out in this crazy, fast-changing world.
It feels like it's changing faster than ever these days, right?
It really does.
Like every week there's something new to learn, a new technology or trend.
Exactly.
It can be so overwhelming.
It really can. And you know what I think is really valuable about Hiroyuki's perspective is that it's not just coming from some, ivory tower academic.
Right.
This is someone who's actually built a successful career by breaking the mold. So he's not just theorizing about the future of work.
Yeah, he's been there, done that.
He's lived it. And he's offering a really practical, no-nonsense guide for people who are ready to ditch the traditional playbook. You know what I mean?
Totally. Like, stop playing by someone else's rules and figure out what works for you.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that really struck me right off the bat reading this book was this quote from him. He says something like, "If eating didn't require work, I wouldn't bother."
Whoa.
It really makes you think, right?
It does. It challenges that whole idea that hard work is inherently virtuous.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. All those messages we've absorbed about the importance of hard work and, putting in the hours.
Like, is that really the key to happiness? Or are we buying into something that's outdated?
Exactly. Especially in a world where automation and AI are, rapidly changing the nature of work.
It feels like a lot of those old assumptions are starting to crumble.
They are. And Hiroyuki really gets into this idea, especially in the context of Japan, where, that traditional model of lifetime employment is starting to break down.
It's not the ironclad guarantee it used to be.
Not at all. And he uses some really interesting real-life examples to illustrate this shift. Like, there's this story about a former salaryman.
Oh, wow. A salaryman.
Yeah, who left this high-paying corporate job to move to Australia and become a part-time teacher. Can you imagine having the courage to make a change like that?
That's a huge leap of faith. It makes you wonder what kind of skills or experiences would allow you to do something totally different.
Right. Like, what transferable skills do you have right now that could translate to a completely different field?
Yeah, like what could you bring to the table even if you were starting from scratch in a new industry?
I think that's something we should all be thinking about. And that's what I appreciate about Hiroyuki's approach. He's all about empowering people to, take control of their careers and find what truly makes them happy.
Instead of just blindly following the path that's laid out for them.
Exactly. And he doesn't mince words when it comes to debunking some of those deeply held beliefs about work. Like, he's pretty skeptical about the whole idea of blindly following job popularity rankings.
Oh, yeah. Those lists that tell you the best companies to work for.
Yeah. And why do you think he's skeptical of those?
Well, it seems kind of obvious when you think about it. Those rankings are usually based on the companies that are currently at the top.
Yeah, the ones that are super popular and everyone wants to work for.
But what does that really tell you? Like, are those companies still going to be on top 5 or 10 years from now?
That's a really good point. It's like buying a stock when it's at its highest price. You might be missing out on the real growth opportunities.
Exactly. You want to find the companies that are on the rise, the ones that have the potential to become the next big thing, not the ones that are already there.
So instead of chasing those big names,
right,
we should be looking for companies that are, maybe a little bit under the radar, but have a lot of potential for growth.
And where your skills and talents can actually make a difference.
Yes. And this actually ties into another interesting concept that he brings up. He talks about this distinction between membership-type employment and job-type employment.
What's that all about? That sounds kind of technical.
Yeah, it is a little bit.
Yeah.
But basically, he's contrasting the traditional Japanese approach to work,
right,
where your identity is really closely tied to the company you work for.
You're part of the family.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the membership-type employment. He's contrasting that with a more individualistic, skills-based approach that's more common in the U.S., for example. That's what he calls job-type employment.
So in a membership-type environment, you're more like a member of a family, whereas in a job-type setup, you're hired for your specific skills and expertise.
Exactly. And Hiroyuki argues that the Japanese emphasis on membership-type employment can actually limit your career growth.
Interesting.
Because it encourages you to be more of a generalist rather than developing, really specialized skills that would make you valuable across different companies and industries.
So it's like being a jack of all trades, but master of none.
Yeah. And in today's world, wouldn't that put you at a disadvantage?
Especially with the rise of automation,
Mm-hmm.
and AI companies are looking for people with very specific skills.
Right. They need specialists who can solve specific problems, not just generalists who can do a little bit of everything.
And this goes hand in hand with his view on the changing nature of work,
Mm-hmm.
where job hopping is becoming more and more common, even in Japan.
It's not seen as this betrayal anymore.
Right. This is part of career progression.
It's like you're building your own portfolio of skills and experiences, and you're taking those with you to different companies and different roles.
It's like you're building your own brand almost.
Exactly. And this goes back to his point about choosing a job that aligns with your skills and interests rather than simply joining a company for the sake of belonging.
Yeah, like don't just chase a brand name or a prestigious title.
Right. Find a place where you can actually contribute and grow.
And where the work itself is something that you find meaningful.
And that brings us to another really important point that he makes. He warns against the passion trap.
Oh, yeah, the passion
Yeah.
trap. I've definitely fallen into that one before.
I think a lot of us have. It's where you end up being exploited for your love of a job.
You're so passionate about the work that you're willing to work extra hours or accept a lower salary.
Because you just love what you do.
Right. But that could be really dangerous because it can lead to burnout and resentment.
Absolutely. You end up feeling taken advantage of.
Yeah, and your passion starts to fade.
And Hiroyuki is very clear about this. He says work is ultimately a means to an end.
It's not an end in itself.
It's about securing financial stability.
Right.
So you can pursue your true passions and live a fulfilling life.
Mhm.
It's not about sacrificing your happiness on the altar of work.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where you can earn a good living doing something you enjoy, or at least tolerate,
Right.
while still having the time and resources to pursue your passions outside of work.
Exactly. And this is where his critique of the Japanese work ethic gets really interesting.
You mean that legendary work ethic that Japan is famous for?
Yeah. All those stories about salarymen working long hours and, sacrificing their personal lives for the company, he doesn't buy it. He calls it a myth
A myth.
that's been perpetuated by government propaganda and historical context.
Interesting. So those long hours aren't actually translating into greater productivity or happiness.
Not necessarily. He even cites data that contradicts this perception. Like Japan actually ranks last in employee engagement in a global survey.
Last. Wow, that's surprising.
And they have one of the lowest happiness rankings in the developed world.
But if they're not really working that hard, then what's with this perception of Japan as a nation of workaholics?
That's what we're going to dig into after the break. He has some really thought-provoking ideas about why this perception persists and what it reveals about Japanese culture.
This is already making me rethink some of my own assumptions about work and success. I can't wait to hear more.
Me too. Stay tuned.
Okay, so we're back. And before the break, we were talking about how Hiroyuki kind of debunks this whole Japanese work ethic myth.
Right, like it doesn't really hold up when you look at the data.
Exactly. And he has some really interesting thoughts on why this perception persists. Like he talks about this deeply ingrained sense of duty to work that's so prevalent in Japanese culture.
It's like this unspoken rule that everyone's expected to follow.
He thinks it's a leftover from socialist ideals and even questions why someone who contributes to society through taxes should be obligated to work at all.
That's a pretty radical idea.
It is. He remembers seeing non-working adults in his childhood neighborhood who were perfectly content.
Really?
Yeah, and they raise well-adjusted children. So it challenges that assumption that work is essential for a meaningful life.
It's like we've been conditioned to believe that our worth is tied to our productivity.
Right, like you're only valuable if you're constantly working and contributing to the economy.
And this ties into his critique of unpaid overtime, which is still a big problem in Japan.
Oh yeah, I've heard stories about that. It's crazy.
It's like you're expected to work late and on weekends without any extra pay.
And it's seen as a sign of dedication and loyalty to the company.
But Hiroyuki finds that absurd, especially from the perspective of a contract-based work culture where your time is literally worth money.
It's like you're giving away your most valuable resource for free.
And it can lead to burnout and resentment.
Yeah, you end up feeling taken advantage of.
And it can really damage your sense of self-worth.
He's really advocating for young people to prioritize their well-being and see themselves as independent agents rather than, just cogs in a machine.
Especially in today's job market, where company loyalty is often not reciprocated.
Right, like companies can lay you off or restructure without a second thought.
So you need to be looking out for your own best interests.
And that means setting boundaries and not being afraid to say no to things that don't serve you.
It's a pretty big shift in mindset from the traditional Japanese work culture, which often emphasizes putting the company's needs above your own.
It is. But he thinks it's essential for navigating the future of work, where adaptability and self-reliance are going to be key.
It's like you need to be able to pivot and reinvent yourself as the job market changes.
Exactly. And he acknowledges that this shift can be challenging for Japanese people in particular.
Why is that?
Well, he brings up this fascinating scientific fact.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned something about a gene variant before the break. What's the story there?
Okay, so apparently Japanese people have a higher prevalence of this particular gene variant that's been linked to anxiety.
Really? So there's like a genetic predisposition towards worry that's more common in Japan?
That's what he suggests.
That's fascinating. But how does this tie back to the work culture we've been talking about?
Well, he thinks this genetic predisposition might contribute to certain societal tendencies, like risk aversion and a preference for conformity.
Which makes sense when you think about Japan's emphasis on social harmony and avoiding uncertainty.
Right. It's like all the pieces start to fit together.
It makes me wonder if this genetic predisposition towards anxiety might make it even harder for Japanese people to embrace this individualistic, risk-taking approach to work that Hiroyuki advocates.
That's a really interesting question. And he doesn't go too deep into the implications of this genetic factor. But he does offer what he believes is a powerful antidote to anxiety. Finding happiness by knowing when you have enough.
That sounds like a concept that transcends cultural boundaries.
It does. It's about finding contentment in the present moment, rather than constantly striving for more.
It's so easy to get caught up in that, especially in a consumerist society where we're bombarded with messages about what we should be buying and achieving.
He emphasizes the importance of appreciating your current situation and not falling into the trap of chasing an ever-increasing standard of living.
It's like that hedonic treadmill where you're always running but never getting anywhere.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that this message of contentment is coming from someone who's achieved a high level of success in the tech world.
He's not just some monk living in a cave.
Right. He shares how he embraces a simple lifestyle despite his wealth, like finding joy in everyday things like cooking at home.
So he's walking the talk.
He's not just preaching from some ivory tower. He challenges you to reflect on your own definition of enough and ask yourself what truly brings you joy.
And what about those who are just starting out in their careers? Those who might not feel like they have enough yet?
He suggests finding a passion, something he calls a personal religion that gives you a sense of purpose and reduces the anxiety that can come with constantly striving for material possessions.
Like a guiding principle or a North Star.
Exactly. And this brings us to his perspective on Japan's future, which is, to put it mildly, a bit concerning.
Oh no, what's he worried about?
He doesn't sugarcoat the challenges. Declining population, aging workforce, shrinking economy. These are serious issues with far-reaching consequences.
Wow, that sounds pretty bleak. But what's his advice for navigating these headwinds?
He emphasizes the need to adapt and embrace global opportunities. The population decline is a particularly pressing issue.
How bad is it?
Projections suggest that Japan's population could shrink to Meiji-era levels by 2100.
Wow, that's a huge decrease. What kind of impact would that have?
Well, think about it. Reduced tax revenue, a strained social security system, a less vibrant economy. It's a pretty dire scenario.
So what's the solution?
He highlights the need for automation and even immigration to address the labor shortages that will inevitably result from this demographic shift.
Those are pretty controversial topics in Japan.
They are. But he argues that these changes are necessary for Japan's survival in the long run.
So he's calling for some pretty radical shifts in mindset.
He is. And he encourages young people to be open to working abroad or acquiring skills that are in demand globally.
It's like he's saying that the traditional boundaries are dissolving.
Right. The future belongs to those who are adaptable, resourceful, and willing to embrace change.
So how can we prepare ourselves for this future?
He has some really concrete advice on how to expand your options and create a more fulfilling life. That's what we'll be discussing after the break.
I'm all ears. This is getting really good. Stay tuned.
So we're back and ready to dive into Hiroyuki's practical advice for expanding our options. You know, he's all about taking control and creating your own future.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear this part. Because we've talked about the challenges and the big picture stuff. But what can we actually do to, make things happen?
That's where he really shines. He breaks down this idea of expanding your options into three main approaches.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's hear them.
First up, actively creating new options.
That sounds pretty straightforward. What does he mean by that?
It's about taking concrete steps to broaden your horizons, like learning a new skill, getting a degree, starting a side hustle, even making a big move to a new city or country.
So it's about being proactive, not just waiting for opportunities to come to you, but going out and creating them yourself.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of your future and not being afraid to step outside of your comfort zone.
I like that. What's the second approach?
This one is about becoming aware of existing options that you might have overlooked.
So like opening yourself up to possibilities you didn't even know existed?
Exactly. It could be something as simple as researching different career paths or signing up for job platforms, or even just talking to people in different fields to learn about their experiences.
I think we often limit ourselves by simply not knowing what's out there.
Totally. It's like we get stuck in our own little bubbles, surrounded by people who are doing similar things.
We don't realize how many other options are out there.
He wants you to challenge your assumptions and be open to new possibilities.
Makes sense. So what's the third approach?
This one might be a bit more challenging for some. Reconsidering options you might have previously dismissed.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of options are we talking about?
It could be things like embracing a simpler lifestyle to reduce your financial needs, moving back in with your family to save money, or even considering options like starting your own business or freelancing.
So it's about thinking outside the box and questioning those conventional paths that we're often told to follow.
Exactly. He wants you to break free from those limitations and create a path that truly aligns with your values and priorities.
I love that. And he specifically mentions two qualifications that can be incredibly valuable for expanding your options: a college degree and fluency in English.
He sees those as like passports to a wider range of opportunities.
I can definitely see the value in both of those. But why English specifically?
He points out that English is the global language of business and technology. It opens doors to a whole new world of information, job opportunities, even social connections.
It's like having a key to unlock a globalized world.
Exactly. And while learning a new language can be challenging, he stresses that it's an investment worth making.
Okay, so we've talked about the what of expanding your options, but what about the how? Like, what kind of mindset or skills do you need to be successful at this?
He identifies 5 key traits that he believes are essential for what he calls a pioneering spirit.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's hear them.
First up, being a strong self-learner.
That makes sense, especially in today's world where there's so much information available online.
Right. He believes that anyone with internet access can teach themselves almost anything.
So it's about taking initiative and being resourceful.
Exactly. Second is taking action. Not letting fear or procrastination hold you back.
So like, just do it kind of thing.
Pretty much. He encourages readers to just get started, even if they're not sure what the outcome will be.
Easier said than done sometimes, but I get the point.
And this ties directly into the third trait, being fearless in the face of failure.
He doesn't see failure as a setback, but as a learning opportunity.
Exactly. It's all part of the process.
What's the fourth trait?
This one might seem counterintuitive to some. Letting go of perfectionism.
Really? I thought striving for excellence was a good thing.
It is. But he warns against getting bogged down in the pursuit of perfection, which can actually lead to paralysis and procrastination.
So it's about finding that balance between striving for excellence and not letting perfectionism hold you back.
Exactly. And the fifth and final trait is being likable.
I wouldn't have expected that one to be on the list, but it actually makes a lot of sense.
Right. People want to work with and help people they like and trust.
So it's not just about what you know, but also about who you know and how you connect with others.
It's about building relationships, nurturing your network, and being a person others want to collaborate with.
Wow. We've covered so much in this deep dive. It's been a whirlwind of insights, challenges, practical advice.
It really has. And if there's one key takeaway, I hope you'll remember it's this. You have the power to create the future you want.
I love that. So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to take these ideas to heart, challenge your assumptions, and start building the future you deserve.
It all starts with that first step. What will yours be?
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive, but we hope you've enjoyed this exploration with us. And until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.